Hello and welcome. Haven't managed to post in a little while. I've had a few setbacks, including not having any internet for a while and needing to buy a new GPU, which has been tricky in the last few months. Anyway, content should be coming in regularly now, so on with the video. Intel, in their desperation to beat AMD at something, seem to have decided to challenge the 2011 Bulldozer range of AMD CPUs for worst new product ever, with the latest offering of the 11900K. For those of you that don't remember AMD's Bulldozer range, otherwise known as the FX series of processors, when they launched in late 2011, they not only failed to match the competition in performance, but in many cases also performed worse than the products they were meant to be replacing, the Phenom 2 range of parts. And now it seems it's Intel's turn to try this baffling strategy for themselves. The problem for Intel is that while these new processors are based around their first new microarchitecture in 6 years, Cypress Cove, they come with a 19% IPC improvement, which is quite impressive. They've had to backport the design to 14nm instead of the 10nm they were designed for, and that means that the flagship 11900K is limited to only 8-core 16-thread, whereas last generation's 10900K managed to squeeze in 10 cores and 20 threads. Further compound the issue is that the base frequency of the 11900K is 200 MHz lower at 3.5 GHz compared to 3.7 GHz of the 10900K, meaning that even in a single or lightly threaded workloads, the 19% IPC improvement is somewhat eroded. If we take a look at the data from the Gamers Nexus chart of render times with the GN logo in Blender, we can see that the 10900K does indeed outperform its supposed replacement by a noticeable margin, thanks to its 2 extra cores. Although AMD's lead in productivity workloads is also noticeable, with the 5800X outperforming both Intel parts, despite being an 8-core part. It's hardly news anymore that AMD lead in just about all areas of productivity. This exact situation isn't repeated with all workloads, of course, and if specific data is important to you, do check out their full review and all the data. I don't have access to test this hardware myself and rely on others to put in the many hours that is required to produce charts like this, so if you're interested in more information, do please check out their video. With the 2 additional cores, the 10900K's results are perhaps not a surprise. I mean, AMD's 5800X results notwithstanding. And I had presumed that the gaming performance of the 11900K would get a significant boost from that increase in IPC. However, if we look at this chart from Hardware Unboxed this time, who personally think do some of, if not the best, gaming analysis, so check them out if you haven't already. Anyway, we can see that the 10900K again comes out on top when averaged over a bunch of different titles. It's very close, and you could argue it's within margin of error, but even if it's a draw, that's a bad result for Intel's new part. And again, it leaves Intel trailing AMD. This was the only real area of relevance for Intel prior to the Ryzen 5000 series, so it's not good that they are still trailing. So with a lower core count and at best similar performance, sometimes inferior, the only hope for the 11900K is cost, and for some reasons I cannot fathom. They have decided to price the 11900K at around 20% higher than the superior performing 10900K, just to make sure that nobody buys it, I presume, and there really is no reason to buy this part as it stands. That said, I wouldn't recommend the 10900K either. To be honest, the 10850K is almost identical in performance and it's cheaper, so just buy that, I guess. If, however, you are in the market for an Intel 8-core 16-thread CPU, the 10700K at its current price is quite compelling. Performance is close enough to the 11900K in a lot of situations, while being much cheaper. And it even does well in performance when compared to AMD's 3700X, although the 10700K is currently on offer, and if that offer ends, the situation will probably change and probably just go back to buying the AMD part. It's also worth noting that while Intel are mostly struggling to compete with themselves at this point, AMD are offering similar or leading performance while doing so at less power. Most gamers probably don't care, but the 5600X offers mostly the same performance at only 65 watts compared to Intel's 125 watt parts, which is quite impressive. And the 5900X not only outperforms everything Intel have, but it does so at less power, which is likely to be a consideration for people looking at this from a work perspective. Maybe less so for gamers, but still worth bearing in mind. so I'm not going to waste too much time with the 11700K. Gamers Nexus referred to it as a waste of sand, and I largely agree, though it does have 8-core 16 threads, so I guess it's a better option than the more expensive 11900K. So the top end is rivaling 2011's Bulldozer CPUs for why do these even exist, but some of the less expensive parts may actually be okay. I haven't yet seen any benchmarks for the 11400F, as budget parts generally don't get as much attention, but at £150, roughly, for a 6-core 12-thread with 4.4 GHz turbo clock speed, which is quite a lot of CPU for not a lot of money. And if that is the sort of price range that you would be looking at for a CPU, it's definitely a very good option. AMD don't even have a lot that can compete in this price point. It's actually slightly cheaper than the Ryzen 5 3600, which is also a 12-thread part and probably quite similar on performance. But it is better than the 3500X, which is only 6-core 6-thread. So that does actually give Intel a thread advantage at this price point, and that doesn't happen very often with Intel parts. In fact, that is a bit of a novelty, and it is worth noting. So I skipped over the 11600K, which a lot of reviewers seem to think is probably the best of the bunch, and, well, they could well be correct in that. So I kind of have saved the best for last. For the most part in performance, it matches up to the slightly more expensive Ryzen 5 5600X. Close enough anyway, most of the time. Although you do have to ignore the higher power consumption of the Intel part. Again, more of a concern for some people than it is for others. Most gamers I know generally don't care about power consumption. And that is just the problem that 14nm parts do face when compared to the significantly newer process of AMD's 7nm components. The 11600K is at least competitive with AMD, which is about as good as Intel can really hope to do at the moment. As we're probably looking at this as a gaming part in most cases, I would give the 10600KF some serious consideration, as it's quite a bit cheaper while offering broadly similar performance, and that saving could be put towards a GPU. Given current GPU prices, any savings on CPUs will certainly help, and that rounds up what should be the last of Intel's 14nm CPUs. It's been a long road for Intel to get away from this now ancient process, and it's certainly been a problem for these CPUs that were never designed to be on it. The backporting process has made them slower, more power hungry, and worst of all, late. It is this lateness that I feel is worst of all, even worse than performance regression of the flagship 11900K. Alder Lake is due out in only a few months and brings yet another new socket, but more importantly, even more IPC, and that should render these parts even more irrelevant than they already are. But with Intel finally getting to 10nm later this year, it really could be worth just holding on a little bit longer if you are currently contemplating buying a new CPU. We really do need both companies producing good products at the same time to drive innovation forward, because all we've had for a long time now is more performance equals more cost, and a change in the colour of the box is all that's really occurred. We really should have budget 8-core parts by now, not 8-core flagship components like the 11900K.